It was a moonless night when I first encountered the Carnival of Forgotten Souls. The mist clung to the ground like a shroud, and an unsettling chill hung in the air. The carnival's lights flickered faintly through the fog, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance on their own. The carnival had a reputation for being a place where reality warped and twisted, and despite, or perhaps because of, its infamy, I felt irresistibly drawn to it. The entrance was marked by a grand archway, its once vibrant colors faded to a dull gray. The sign, hanging precariously, read "Carnival of Forgotten Souls" in jagged, faded letters. With a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, I pushed open the creaking gate and stepped inside. The carnival was eerily quiet, save for the distant, mournful strains of carnival music that seemed to drift on the fog. The rides were decrepit, their once cheerful lights now extinguished. The Ferris wheel loomed overhead like a skeletal giant, and the carousel stood still, its horses frozen in grotesque poses. I wandered deeper into the grounds, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the stillness. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles like spectral fingers. The carnival seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn revealing new attractions that had fallen into disrepair. A broken-down roller coaster loomed in the distance, its tracks twisted and rusted. Eventually, I came across a dilapidated tent, its entrance flapping in the wind. The tent's exterior was adorned with faded banners depicting grotesque clowns and nightmarish creatures. Drawn by a strange sense of compulsion, I stepped inside. The interior of the tent was dimly lit by flickering lanterns, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. An old, dusty fortune teller's table stood in the center, covered with tarot cards, a crystal ball, and other arcane items. The air was thick with the scent of incense and a palpable sense of foreboding. A figure sat behind the table, cloaked in dark robes, its face obscured by a hood. The figure's presence was unsettling, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as it spoke in a voice that was both raspy and ethereal. "Welcome," it intoned. "You seek answers, but be warned, what you find here may be more than you are prepared to face." Despite my growing unease, I felt compelled to sit down. The figure began to lay out the tarot cards, each one depicting disturbing imagery, twisted faces, dark forests, and eyes that seemed to follow me with an unearthly intensity. The crystal ball glowed with an unsettling light, casting eerie reflections on the walls. As the fortune teller worked, the atmosphere in the tent grew heavier. The carnival music outside seemed to swell, becoming a dissonant, mournful wail. The shadows on the walls seemed to deepen, and the temperature dropped. I could hear faint whispers, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the crystal ball erupted in a burst of light, and the tent around me began to dissolve into darkness. I found myself standing in a deserted maze, its walls lined with mirrors that distorted and warped my reflection. The whispers grew louder, echoing around me in a cacophony of despair. I wandered through the maze, each turn revealing new horrors. The mirrors showed not just my reflection but also disturbing scenes from my past, regrets, failures, and lost opportunities. The carnival music outside had become a chaotic, nightmarish symphony, and the whispers seemed to come from within the mirrors themselves. At one point, I stumbled into a room filled with old carnival props, clown costumes, broken toys, and faded banners. The room was bathed in an eerie, flickering light, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. In the center of the room was a large, cracked mirror, its surface reflecting nothing but shadows. I approached the mirror, drawn by an inexplicable force. As I wiped away some of the grime, the reflection began to shift. Instead of my own face, I saw a nightmarish figure, a gaunt, skeletal being with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth frozen in a silent scream. The figure's hand reached out from the mirror, its fingers elongated and twisted. Panicked, I turned to leave the room, but the entrance had vanished, replaced by a wall of shifting shadows. The whispers grew louder, turning into a mournful chorus of lost souls. The mirror's surface rippled, and the figure began to emerge from it, stepping into the room with a slow, deliberate pace. Desperate to escape, I ran through the maze, the walls closing in around me and the ground shifting beneath my feet. The reflections in the mirrors seemed to come alive, reaching out with ghostly hands. The whispers were now a deafening roar, and the shadows seemed to move with a malevolent intent. I finally found a door and burst through it, tumbling into an open area that resembled a carnival ring. The fog was thicker here, swirling around my legs like a living entity. The carnival's lights were now a ghostly glow, and the music played on, a haunting melody that seemed to come from within the fog itself. In the center of the ring stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface reflecting only darkness. As I approached the mirror, it began to ripple, and a figure emerged from it, tall, cloaked in shadow, and with eyes that glowed with an eerie light. The figure extended a hand toward me, and I felt a cold, oppressive grip on my arm. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and the fog closed in around me. The mirror's surface shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment reflecting a different facet of my fear and despair. I struggled to free myself from the figure's grasp, but it seemed to draw me closer, its presence suffocating. With a final burst of strength, I broke free from the figure and ran through the fog, my heart pounding in my chest. The carnival seemed to stretch endlessly, and the whispers followed me, growing fainter as I ran. I stumbled out of the fog and found myself back at the entrance of the carnival, the gate standing open. As I looked back, the carnival was gone, vanished without a trace. The fog began to lift, and the only remnants of the carnival were the lingering sense of dread and the faint echoes of the music that continued to haunt my dreams. The Carnival of Forgotten Souls had left its mark on me, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond the veil of reality. The old carnival was long abandoned, but when I stumbled across it one foggy evening, something about it beckoned me. The dilapidated sign hanging crookedly read, "Midnight's Last Ride," but the letters were barely legible, worn by time and weather. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a touch of recklessness, I crossed the rusted gate that creaked ominously behind me, stepping into a world frozen in darkness and decay. The carnival was eerily silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant, mournful wail of the wind. The Ferris wheel loomed high, a skeletal giant against the dim sky, its once vibrant lights long extinguished. I wandered through the labyrinth of forgotten stalls and rides, each one a relic of a time long gone. The carousel, though devoid of its once lively music, still spun slowly, as if moved by an unseen hand. As I ventured deeper, a faint, distorted melody reached my ears, a forlorn tune that seemed to draw me toward an old tent at the far end of the carnival grounds. The tent's entrance was partially torn, revealing a darkness that seemed to consume the surrounding light. With a mix of apprehension and excitement, I pushed through the tattered fabric and entered the tent. Inside, the tent was surprisingly intact, its interior illuminated by a single flickering light bulb hanging from the center. The light cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing old carnival posters and dusty prizes. In the center of the tent was a stage, and on it stood a vintage, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. As I approached the mirror, I noticed that its frame was intricately carved with unsettling patterns, faces twisted in silent screams and grotesque figures locked in eternal torment. I wiped away some of the dust, and the moment the mirror's surface was exposed, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. My reflection was not alone. Behind me, in the mirror, stood a shadowy figure, a gaunt, ghastly presence with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth frozen in a silent scream. The figure's hand was raised, reaching toward me as if trying to break free from the glass. I spun around, but the tent was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, replaced by my own frightened face. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the figure had not vanished, it had moved closer. The air grew colder, and the light bulb above began to flicker violently. I tried to leave the tent, but the entrance seemed to have vanished, replaced by a solid wall of fabric. Panic set in as I banged on the walls, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the figure emerged from it, stepping into the tent with a slow, deliberate gait. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness, and its mouth was stretched into a grotesque, silent scream that resonated with an inhuman sorrow. As it moved closer, I felt a crushing weight on my chest, as if the very air was being sucked out of the tent. Desperate, I stumbled backward, my mind racing for an escape. The mirror's surface began to shatter, and the pieces fell like sharp rain, each fragment reflecting the figure's ghastly face. The tent walls seemed to close in around me, and the ground beneath my feet began to twist and shift. With a final, frantic effort, I managed to push through a section of the fabric, tumbling out into the foggy night. The carnival was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I was left alone in the fog, the echoes of the silent scream still ringing in my ears. As I stumbled away, I knew that the carnival was more than just a place of lost memories. It was a portal to a realm of unspeakable terror, where the boundaries between reality and nightmare had been irreversibly shattered. The silent scream would haunt my dreams forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our world. It was an unusually crisp autumn evening when I first saw the Carnival of Lost Whispers. The carnival was reputed to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a phantasmagoric spectacle that vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. The air was thick with an almost tangible sense of dread, and the carnival's faint lights flickered in the distance, like the last vestiges of a dying star. I had heard rumors about the carnival's sinister reputation, a place where reality bent, and nightmares came to life. The stories varied. Some said it was cursed, others claimed it was a portal to a darker realm. Curiosity, always my greatest weakness, propelled me toward the entrance, where an old, wrought iron gate stood ajar, creaking in the breeze. Beyond the gate, the carnival lay in eerie silence, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the skeletal remains of what had once been vibrant attractions. The Ferris wheel dominated the landscape, its enormous frame rusted and skeletal, each cabin swaying slightly as if moved by unseen hands. The carousel, with its grotesquely painted horses and chipped mirrors, spun lazily, its music long gone. The once joyous carnival grounds were now a desolate tableau of faded colors and broken dreams. My heart pounded as I ventured further into the grounds. I could feel an unsettling tension in the air, as though I were intruding on something that had been waiting for me. The carnival seemed to distort with every step I took. Tunnels and stalls appeared and vanished as if mocking my attempt to navigate through its labyrinth. Eventually, I stumbled upon a tent that seemed to call to me with its flickering light. The tent was worn and tattered, its entrance flapping ominously. Taking a deep breath, I entered. Inside, the tent was surprisingly well preserved, the floor covered in a thick layer of dust that had settled over carnival relics, old game booths, faded posters, and a dilapidated stage. The stage was dominated by a large, ornate mirror, its frame carved with disturbing motifs, twisted faces and anguished figures. I approached it, driven by a mixture of dread and fascination. As I wiped the dust from its surface, I noticed a strange, almost imperceptible ripple across the glass. My reflection wavered, and a chill ran down my spine. The mirror's surface began to distort further, and then I saw it, another figure behind me, standing perfectly still. Its appearance was skeletal, draped in shadow, with eyes that glowed with an eerie light. It had a presence that seemed to fill the room with an oppressive dread. I spun around, but the tent was empty. The moment I turned back, the figure had vanished. I felt a cold, clammy hand touch my shoulder. I whirled around again, this time with more urgency. My breath was ragged, and my pulse quickened as I searched the tent. It was empty, but the silence was now thick and suffocating. I glanced back at the mirror, and my reflection was now replaced by the ghastly figure. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and the air grew colder. Panic surged through me. I tried to leave the tent, but the entrance had somehow disappeared, replaced by a solid wall of fabric. I was trapped. The mirror's surface began to crack, and the figure's expression of torment seemed to deepen. The cracks spread like veins, and shards of glass fell to the ground, each fragment reflecting the figure's anguished face. I heard whispers, soft, mournful voices rising from the cracks. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of anguished cries and despairing moans. The ground beneath me started to tremble, and the tent walls seemed to close in. Desperate, I grabbed a nearby broken wooden plank and smashed it against the fabric walls. The tent groaned as if in pain, and a small opening appeared. I pushed through with all my strength, tumbling out into the cool night air. The carnival grounds were still there, but they had changed. The colors were more muted, the atmosphere thicker with dread. The Ferris wheel now spun at an unsettling speed, and the carousel's horses seemed to move on their own, their eyes following me with a malevolent gleam. I stumbled across the grounds, trying to find an exit, but the carnival seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. My mind raced, and I felt an overpowering sense of being watched. The whispers from the tent had followed me, filling the air with their mournful chorus. They seemed to echo from the very ground, rising up around me. Suddenly, I found myself in front of a mirror maze, its entrance shrouded in darkness. Desperation drove me to enter. The maze was a nightmarish labyrinth of reflections and shadows, each turn revealing more distorted images of myself. The whispers grew louder, and the reflections began to show not just myself but countless other figures, trapped and writhing in the mirrored surfaces. I could hear the whispers clearly now, each one a fragment of a sorrowful tale, lost souls, broken dreams, and forgotten fears. They seemed to guide me through the maze, leading me deeper into its heart. The reflections of the figures began to reach out from the glass, their hands pressing against the surfaces as if trying to pull me in. Finally, I reached the center of the maze, where a large mirror stood. Its surface was perfectly smooth, reflecting a scene of desolate emptiness. But then, the reflection began to change. It showed a vast, shadowy expanse, a void where the carnival seemed to stretch endlessly. The reflection of the shadowy figure from the tent appeared, moving toward me with an eerie grace. I felt a cold draft and turned to see a dark, swirling vortex opening behind me. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and the shadows from the maze began to converge. I was enveloped by darkness, the ground vanishing beneath me as I was pulled into the abyss. I woke up the next morning on the outskirts of the carnival grounds, lying on the cold, damp grass. The carnival was gone, vanished without a trace. The only evidence of its existence was the lingering sense of dread and the faint echoes of whispers that seemed to follow me wherever I went. The carnival of lost whispers had claimed me, a reminder of the nightmares that lay just beyond the veil of reality. I left the area, but the carnival's haunting presence never truly left me. The whispers continued to haunt my dreams, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the places we dare not explore. It was a mist-shrouded October night when I first saw the Carnival of Eternal Echoes. The carnival appeared out of nowhere, like a mirage, its lights flickering ominously through the dense fog. The air was filled with an unsettling chill, and an inexplicable sense of dread clung to me as I approached the entrance. The archway was adorned with garish, faded colors, the once bright paint peeling away to reveal the rusted iron beneath. The sign read, "Carnival of Eternal Echoes," its letters uneven and barely visible. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, I pushed open the gate, which groaned in protest, and stepped into the carnival grounds. The carnival was eerily quiet, save for the faint, distorted strains of carnival music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The rides, long abandoned, loomed in the darkness like skeletal remains of a forgotten past. The Ferris wheel creaked slowly, its empty cars swaying as if pushed by an unseen hand, while the carousel stood still, its horses frozen in a grotesque dance. As I wandered deeper into the grounds, the fog grew thicker, wrapping around me like a living entity. I stumbled across a fortune teller's tent, its entrance draped in heavy, velvet curtains. The tent's exterior was tattered, but the lights inside flickered with an eerie, inviting glow. Drawn by a strange compulsion, I pushed aside the curtains and stepped inside. The interior of the tent was surprisingly intact. An old wooden table stood in the center, covered with dusty tarot cards and a crystal ball that glowed with an unsettling light. The tent was filled with the faint scent of incense and an atmosphere of forgotten secrets. At the table sat a figure draped in dark robes, its face obscured by a hood. "Welcome," the figure intoned, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "I have been expecting you." I hesitated but then sat down, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination. The figure began to lay out the tarot cards, each one depicting disturbing, surreal images, eyes weeping tears of blood, grotesque creatures in shadowy landscapes, and faces twisted in silent screams. The fortune teller's hands moved with a practiced grace, and as the cards were laid out, a chill spread through the tent. The figure's voice grew softer, more insistent. "You seek answers, but what you will find here is not what you expect. The echoes of this carnival hold more than mere fortune, they reveal the darkest corners of your soul." I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow as the figure's words resonated within me. The crystal ball began to glow brighter, and the air grew thick with an oppressive weight. The tent's walls seemed to stretch and shift, and the carnival music grew louder, more discordant. Suddenly, the crystal ball erupted in a burst of light, and the tent around me began to dissolve into darkness. I found myself standing in a deserted funhouse, its entrance framed by flickering neon lights that cast long, eerie shadows. The funhouse was a labyrinth of mirrors and distorted reflections, each surface warped and twisted beyond recognition. As I entered the funhouse, I noticed that my reflection was not alone. The mirrors showed figures that moved independently of my actions, dark shapes with hollow eyes and grotesque grins. The reflections began to change, showing scenes of torment and despair, and the carnival music played on, a haunting melody that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. I wandered through the maze, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. The whispers from the tent followed me, growing louder and more frantic. The mirrors seemed to close in, distorting my reflection and making it difficult to navigate. Every turn revealed new horrors, shattered glass, ghostly figures reaching out, and the sound of distant screams. At one point, I came across a room filled with old carnival props, clown costumes, faded banners, and broken toys. The room was filled with a strange, almost palpable energy. As I examined the items, I noticed a dusty, old clown mask lying on the floor. It had a painted grin that seemed to follow me with its eyes. I picked it up, feeling an odd compulsion to put it on. The moment the mask touched my face, the funhouse seemed to change. The reflections in the mirrors shifted, showing scenes from my past, moments of regret, lost opportunities, and forgotten fears. The carnival music grew louder, more chaotic, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, all crying out in anguish. The mask began to tighten around my face, and I felt a pressure building in my chest. The mirrors around me shattered, and the shards fell like glass rain, each piece reflecting distorted images of myself. I struggled to remove the mask, but it was as if it had fused with my skin. My vision blurred, and the carnival's lights flickered violently. Desperate, I ran through the maze, trying to find an exit. The whispers were now deafening, and the reflections seemed to reach out, their hands pressing against the glass as if trying to pull me into their torment. The funhouse walls shifted and twisted, and the ground beneath me seemed to undulate. Finally, I burst through a door, tumbling into an open area that looked like a carnival ring. The space was vast, but the ground was covered in a thick layer of fog, and the carnival music was now a haunting, dissonant wail. In the center of the ring stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface reflecting nothing but darkness. The mirror began to ripple, and a figure emerged from it, tall, gaunt, and cloaked in shadow. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth was stretched into a sinister, silent grin. The figure extended a hand toward me, and I felt a cold, icy grip on my arm. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and the fog began to close in around me. With a final burst of strength, I broke free from the figure's grasp and fled through the fog. I ran blindly, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The carnival seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the echoing voices followed me, growing fainter as I ran. I emerged from the fog and found myself back at the entrance of the carnival. The gate stood open, and the mist had begun to lift. As I looked back, the carnival was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. The only remnants were the lingering sense of dread and the faint echoes of the carnival music that continued to haunt my dreams. The carnival of eternal echoes had left its mark on me. The memories of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beneath the surface of reality. The echoes of the carnival's twisted past followed me, a chilling reminder of the horrors that wait in the shadows.